The world was watching a funeral. The royal system was sorting a dead woman's jewelry. In August 1997, a black Mercedes tore through the Pontalma Tunnel in Paris, and in one terrible moment, Princess Diana was gone. Within days, flowers covered the gates of Kensington Palace for miles. 1 billion people watched her funeral on television. The grief felt endless, almost too large for one country to hold. But behind the tears, behind the black suits and lowered heads, something quieter was happening. Diana's clothes were being listed, her letters were being handled, and her jewelry, some of the most famous jewelry in the modern royal world, was being counted, classified, and moved. That is where this story really begins. Today we are diving into what happened to the pieces Diana left behind, and why this question still makes people uneasy decades later. Because this is not only a story about diamonds, pearls, and tiaras. It is a story about memory, power, grief, and a royal family that has never fully explained where every piece went. Accounts from journalists, royal historians, jewelry experts, and former insiders all point to the same uncomfortable truth: the public record is incomplete. What many people don't know is that Diana's jewelry was never one simple collection sitting in one simple box. Some pieces were hers, some were not. Some had been loaned to her by the crown. Some came from her own Spencer family. Some were gifts from Charles, from the Queen, or from foreign leaders. And once you understand that, you understand why this whole story became such a mess after she died. Because if a piece belonged to Diana personally, then it should have become part of her estate. If it was crown property, it should have gone back. But what about the pieces in the middle? That is where the whispers start. In the years after Diana's death, familiar pieces began showing up again. A ring here, a brooch there, a bracelet that looked oddly familiar, a tiara the public deeply linked with Diana appearing on another royal woman. Some transfers were openly explained. William gave Diana's sapphire engagement ring to Kate Middleton, and the world was told exactly what it meant. That story was neat, emotional, publicly blessed. Other stories were not neat at all. Some pieces appeared again with no real public explanation. They turned up at state dinners, private gatherings, royal events, and official portraits. Sometimes the answer was simple. The piece had never belonged to Diana in the first place. It had been a crown loan, and the monarchy had every legal right to lend it again. But sometimes the answer was far less clear. Royal watchers noticed it. Journalists noticed it. Jewelry experts noticed it. And once people started looking closely, they found gaps nobody seemed eager to fill. This is not a theft story in the easy, dramatic sense. It is a documentation story. And documentation can be just as dangerous. Take the Spencer tiara, the one most people picture the second Diana's name and the word tiara appear in the same sentence. That famous diamond floral design she wore at her wedding in July 1981 did not belong to the crown. It belonged to the Spencer family. Diana wore it because she was a Spencer before she became a princess. It was loaned to her, and after her death, it remained with the Spencer family. Clean chain of custody, no mystery there. But Diana wore more than the Spencer tiara. During her years as Princess of Wales, she was photographed in at least 6 different tiaras. Some were official crown pieces, like the Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara, the one that became one of her most iconic looks. Others were connected to gifts, private use, or pieces that later slipped into a gray area nobody has fully mapped in public. That is where this stops being a simple fashion story and becomes something much darker. Because while the world remembers Diana as the people's princess, the woman in the revenge dress, The woman who shook hands with AIDS patients and hugged children in hospitals. The royal system had to deal with her as something else after death. An estate, a collection of objects, a set of assets, something to be processed. And systems are rarely sentimental. Many are questioning how such a visible woman could leave behind such an unclear paper trail. Diana was photographed more than almost any woman of her time. Her jewelry was studied constantly. Experts cataloged what she wore. Newspapers reported it. Television repeated it. Books were written about it. So how can it be that several pieces believed to be in her personal possession at the time of her death have never been fully, publicly accounted for? That question is the beating heart of this story. Accounts from journalists and insiders reveal that the confusion did not begin years later. It began almost immediately. Diana's will was partly sealed. The broad shape of her estate became known. Most of it was left to William and Harry. A few specific bequests went to staff, including her butler Paul Burrell. But the jewelry question sat in its own strange corner. It was treated separately, and the exact details of which pieces went where, who approved those transfers, and what inventory existed at the start remained frustratingly blurred. Blurred can hide a lot, and the names attached to this blur made the whole thing more explosive. Camilla Parker Bowles was already one of the most disliked women in Diana's public story. Long before Diana died, Camilla had become, in the eyes of many people, the woman standing in the center of a broken marriage. Charles's admitted affair. Diana's there were three of us in this marriage line. The years of tabloids and public bitterness, all of it had already shaped how the public saw her. So later, when Camilla appeared wearing pieces that looked like things Diana had once worn, the reaction was never going to be calm. It was emotional, immediate, personal, and maybe that was unfair in some cases. But maybe it was also inevitable. Because jewelry in royal life is never just decoration. It is a signal, a message, a form of visual power. When a royal woman wears a specific piece, people do not just see diamonds. They see rank, inheritance, continuity, approval, memory. They see what the palace wants them to see. That is why a missing chain of custody matters here more than it would in almost any other family. The question was never only who wore the jewels. The real question was who had the right to decide. And once that question enters the room, it changes everything. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, a quiet group of royal historians, photographers, jewelers, and devoted watchers had started comparing images. They noticed which pieces had clear records and which did not. They noticed which items had been publicly returned to the crown and which ones seemed to drift into silence. They noticed the difference between a documented inheritance and an unexplained reappearance. And they kept notes. But this was just the surface layer. Because before you can understand why people got so angry, you have to understand how royal jewelry actually works, how Diana's marriage changed her access to these pieces, and why the line between personal property and royal property was never as clean as most people assumed. That was the crack everything else fell through. Let's talk about what really happened before the public ever began asking questions. Royal jewelry in Britain does not sit in one neat category. It falls into at least three rough groups. First, there is crown property. These are pieces held by the monarchy as an institution, not owned in the normal personal way most people think of ownership. The sovereign can loan them, recall them, and pass them from reign to reign. Second, there is personal jewelry, the kind any private person might own. Gifts, inherited pieces, things bought with personal money. Third, there is the murky category, gifts from foreign leaders and dignitaries, which can create real confusion over whether they were personal gifts or gifts to the office. That gray zone matters more than almost anything else in this story. When Diana married Prince Charles in 1981, she entered that system at full speed. Suddenly, she had access to crown pieces for official use. She also had the Spencer family jewels from her own side. Then came gifts from Charles, gifts from the Queen, gifts from foreign visits and state occasions. She wore jewelry the way skilled politicians use speeches. She understood what it could say. Some days it said softness, some days pain, some days defiance. And people noticed. Diana did not wear jewels like someone simply enjoying luxury. She wore them like someone learning how to speak in a room where honest speech was often dangerous. A sapphire ring could become a message. A pearl choker could become armor. A tiara could look like duty in one photograph and loneliness in the next. That is one reason her jewelry became so emotionally charged. These pieces were tied to moments people still remember by heart. Then the marriage broke apart. The formal separation came in 1992. The divorce came in 1996. Once that happened, the quiet question began: what exactly did Diana keep? Some crown pieces clearly went back. That part was expected. But the public never received a complete, easy guide explaining which jewels remained hers as a private woman and which were no longer in her control. We know some details from court records, reporting, and Diana's will. But there were large empty spaces between those details. And empty spaces invite suspicion. What many people don't know is that after the divorce, Diana was no longer a working royal in the same way, but she was still one of the most watched women on earth. She still wore pieces from her own collection. She still carried visual symbols linked to her life with Charles. She still appeared at events where every bracelet, every ring, every pair of earrings was photographed and discussed. So when she died only a year after the divorce, the jewelry question became far more delicate than people first realized. Because now it was not just about a princess, it was about a divorced mother of 2 sons, with a mixed collection of property tied to family, monarchy, gifts, and public history. That is how the pattern begins to emerge. The Spencer tiara, as we said, was straightforward. It belonged to the Spencer family. It went back to the Spencers. But Diana had also worn the Cambridge Lovers' Knot tiara, a crown piece first linked to Queen Mary and later loaned by Queen Elizabeth II. That tiara had become so strongly associated with Diana that many people assumed it was hers. It was not. Legally, that part is simple. Emotionally, it is not simple at all. And then there were the other pieces. Royal watchers, auction records, and accounts from former staff suggested that Diana had personal jewelry in her possession at the time of her death that has never been fully listed in public. Not rumors pulled from nowhere. Not wild message board fantasies, actual documented ambiguity. Pieces seen in photographs. Pieces remembered by people who had seen them. Pieces experts believed were part of her private collection, not just crown loans. That should have led to a crystal clear inventory after her death. It did not. Diana's estate was administered by executors. The broad understanding was that William and Harry would inherit the bulk of what mattered. That sounds simple enough. But the jewelry, according to multiple later accounts, did not move through a process the public could easily follow. The details of who cataloged what, when they did it, and whether all interested parties were fully present at every stage remained strangely cloudy. Experts who spent years studying the issue said the obscurity felt intentional. That word hangs in the air for a reason. Then came the public reaction that made the whole story hotter. Camilla was not just any woman entering the later years of Charles's life. She was already loaded with meaning in Diana's story. Public anger toward her had been building since the affair became impossible to deny. Diana's Panorama interview in 1995 turned that private hurt into a sentence the world never forgot. After Diana died, those old feelings hardened. For many people, grief fused with blame. So when Camilla later appeared in jewels linked in the public mind to Diana, legal facts no longer felt like enough. People did not ask only, "Who owns this?" They asked, "How could she wear that?" That is a very different kind of question. On some occasions, the answer was legally boring. Camilla, Kate, or another royal woman wore a crown piece Diana had once borrowed. End of story, at least on paper. But even there, the emotional charge remained. Diana had made certain pieces unforgettable. She did not just wear them, she stamped them into popular memory. So when another woman wore them later, especially a woman tied to one of the deepest wounds in Diana's life, people felt something sharp and immediate. Royal advisors surely knew that. Which raises another uncomfortable point. In royal life, these decisions are rarely random. Which tiara is worn to which dinner? Which brooch is used for which visit? Which necklace appears in which portrait? These things go through discussion. There is planning. There are suggestions. There are approvals. Visual language matters too much for it not to. That means when a piece strongly associated with Diana returned to public view, someone somewhere understood exactly what that image would do, or should have. The warning signs were all there. Unclear records, charged symbolism, a public still grieving, two sons who were children when their mother died, and a royal institution more comfortable with silence than with open inventory lists. That combination was never going to rest quietly forever. Then came the moment that pushed the story out of private unease and into something much bigger. People began noticing pieces on Camilla that did not just resemble Diana's public crown loans. They resembled jewelry believed to come from Diana's personal collection. That is when the real crisis began. On this particular occasion, the trouble did not arrive with one dramatic confession. It arrived through photographs. By 2005, when Charles and Camilla married, royal watchers had spent years memorizing Diana's style almost down to the clasp of a bracelet. They knew her famous pieces, of course, but they also knew the smaller ones, the brooches, pearl and diamond details, evening bracelets, items she wore at less formal royal events. So when Camilla started appearing in certain pieces that looked very familiar, people who followed royal jewelry closely did not shrug and move on. They started comparing images. One brooch drew early attention. It looked strikingly similar to a pearl and diamond piece Diana had worn in the early 1990s. Then there was a bracelet, nearly identical in design and structure to one experts believed had been part of Diana's personal collection. Later, in a photograph from a more private royal setting, Camilla appeared in a piece that at least 3 jewelry experts reportedly described as consistent with something they had cataloged from Diana's documented collection. That word again, consistent, not proven, not confirmed, but not nothing. This is where people often rush too fast and lose the shape of the story. The issue was not that every piece Camilla wore had once belonged to Diana. That is false. Some were clearly crown items Diana had only borrowed. The issue was that a few pieces seemed to sit in a foggy middle place where no official public transfer had ever been clearly explained. And because the palace never laid out a complete record, the fog stayed. When records are clean, stories die. When records are missing, stories grow teeth. The public reaction was fierce because it touched old pain. Diana was not just remembered as a royal figure, she was remembered as a wounded one. So even legally harmless choices could feel cruel. A familiar tiara, a familiar setting, a familiar glint in a photograph. People saw those images and felt that Diana's memory was being handled by people who had never truly protected her when she was alive. And then, years later, Prince Harry added a deeper layer. When Spare came out in 2023, the headlines focused on fights, family wounds, and palace conflict. But buried in the book were passages that mattered very much to this jewelry story. Harry described the chaos after Diana's death with the pain of someone who had never really stopped living inside those days. He was 12. William was 15. They had lost their mother in front of the whole world and had almost no control over what happened next, not to her image, not to her story, and not to the objects that connected them to her. That detail lands hard for a reason. A boy of 12 does not stand over estate paperwork. A boy of 15 does not lead inventory meetings at a palace. Adults do that. Institutions do that. Offices do that. And once Harry made people think again about how little agency he and William had in those first days, the jewelry question stopped sounding like idle curiosity. It began to sound like a real problem of guardianship and transparency. Some transfers from Diana to her sons became famous. William received her sapphire engagement ring and later used it to propose to Kate. Harry kept pieces too, including 2 diamonds later used in Meghan's ring. Those stories were told warmly, almost beautifully. They offered continuity. They reassured the public that some part of Diana had clearly passed to her children. But what about the rest? That is where accounts from journalists and insiders become impossible to ignore. One former employee of a prominent London jeweler with a royal warrant reportedly said that, in late 1997, they were asked to assess and value several pieces from Diana's estate. The striking part was not the valuation itself. It was the claim that the instruction came not from Diana's executors, but from someone inside the household office. When provenance paperwork was requested, they were told it was being compiled. As far as that source knew, it was never properly shared with the executors. That is a small detail with massive consequences. Another account came from a royal historian who studied official portraits. After systematically comparing jewelry seen on Diana with later pieces worn by Camilla, the finding was careful but sharp. At least 4 items showed strong visual consistency with the same object appearing in both sets of photographs with no public record of transfer. Academic language can sound soft. It is not soft here. Strongly consistent means experts believed the match was serious. Then came the account many people found hardest to shake. A former senior household staff member reportedly told a journalist that in the roughly 72 hours after Diana's death, Kensington Palace was accessible to a surprisingly wide range of people and no formal full inventory had yet begun. The locks were not changed immediately. People came and went. The source did not claim to know what was taken, but they said they knew what they had seen before the formal process and what appeared to be missing after it began. That is the kind of statement that sits in your chest, not because it proves a crime, because it proves vulnerability. And once a story includes a dead princess, 2 grieving children, a famous collection of personal effects, and a 72-hour window before firm control was established, people will ask questions for decades. They should. Any ordinary family would. The only difference here is scale. Diana's life was public, her image was global, and the emotional value of her possessions was immense. Many are questioning how an institution so careful with ceremony could be so unclear with inventory. The monarchy knows how to stage a funeral down to the second. It knows where every carriage should turn and who should stand where. It understands symbolism better than almost any public institution on earth. So when it appears vague about something as loaded as Diana's jewelry, people do not assume innocence first. They assume management. They assume selective silence. And silence has a smell. To be fair, none of this proves that Camilla herself took anything or directed anything. The evidence does not say that. The stronger argument is more institutional than personal. In the confusion after Diana's death, decisions may have been made quickly, unevenly, or without full transparency by people whose first loyalty was to the Crown's smooth functioning, not to Diana's personal legacy. That still matters, perhaps even more than a simpler scandal would. Because simple scandals end, institutional habits do not. By this point, the story had moved beyond did a piece look similar? The deeper issue had become this: was there ever a complete, trustworthy record of Diana's personal jewelry? And if there was, why has it never been fully open to public scrutiny? The full truth was still to come, not as one great reveal, but as a larger picture of how power protects itself, how memory gets managed, and why Diana's sons may never have received a full public answer. That bigger picture is what makes this story impossible to forget. Let's bring the whole picture into focus. The most famous piece in this discussion is the Cambridge Lover's Knot Tiara. It was created for Queen Mary in 1914, with diamond arches and hanging pearl drops that made it one of the grandest tiaras in the royal collection. Queen Elizabeth II later loaned it to Diana, who wore it so often and so memorably that many people came to think of it as hers. The photographs did the rest. Diana in that tiara became one of the defining images of royal glamour and royal sadness all at once. But the lover's knot was crown property. That part matters because it shows how law and emotion split apart in this story. Legally, the tiara returned to the royal collection after Diana died. Nothing improper there. If it is later worn by another senior royal, that is within the rules. Yet emotionally, seeing another woman in a piece the world had tied so deeply to Diana felt like a theft of memory even when no theft had occurred. That is the trap at the center of this whole drama. Royal jewelry is made of metal and stones, but it carries grief like fabric carries scent. This is why the story cannot be solved by saying, well, the lawyers say it was fine. The public was reacting to something bigger than legal ownership. Diana had used jewelry as part of her identity, part of her survival, part of the way she spoke when palace language failed her. So every unexplained transfer, every familiar design, every quiet reappearance felt like one more example of her story being folded back into an institution that had so often tried to control her. William and Harry showed that split better than anyone. William's choice to give Diana's engagement ring to Kate was public, symbolic, and deeply tied to the official royal future. It brought Diana's most recognized piece into the next generation of monarchy. It said continuity. It said blessing. It said the institution could carry her memory forward in plain sight. Harry's choices felt different. In interviews and in Spare, Harry spoke of his mother's possessions with a protective intensity. Not greed, not collector's obsession, something sadder than that. The feeling of a son trying to hold on to what has not already been claimed, processed, or absorbed by a system he no longer trusts. The ring he gave Meghan, using 2 of Diana's diamonds, felt private in a way William's gesture did not. It was not about the crown. It was about family. That difference tells us a lot. It tells us that Diana's jewelry was never only jewelry to her sons. It was evidence of connection, proof she had been here, proof she had touched these things, proof some part of her still belonged to them more than to the machine around them. When pieces are clearly accounted for, that connection can be cherished. When pieces are not clearly accounted for, the missing record becomes its own wound. Scholars and independent historians have pushed harder on this question in recent years, not because they want tabloid chaos, but because material history matters. In the broader world, museums are being asked to show better provenance. Historic houses are being asked to document collections more clearly. Public trust now depends more than ever on records, not just titles. So Diana's post-1997 jewelry dispersal has come to look like one of the most unresolved modern questions in royal material culture. And then there were the auctions. Over the years, pieces linked to Diana have surfaced through former staff, friends, or those claiming to have received gifts from her. Some of those sales may be entirely legitimate. Diana was known to give gifts. But every appearance raises the same questions. Was it documented? Was it clearly hers to give? Were her executors aware? Did William and Harry, as her heirs, receive a full picture? Each public sale reminds people that the map remains incomplete. That is why the unanswered questions still matter. What was the complete inventory of Diana's personal jewelry when she died? Who oversaw it from the first hour? Were her executors present through the whole process? Which items were classified as crown property, and on what basis? Were William and Harry fully informed as they grew older? Are there pieces now held within the royal family whose transfer was never publicly documented? These are not wild questions. They are ordinary estate questions made extraordinary by the woman at the center. The failure here is not proven theft. The failure is opacity. And opacity was one of the forces Diana spent her final years fighting. She lived inside an institution built on silence, ritual, and controlled image. She learned how to use clothes, jewels, photographs, and public feeling to speak around that silence. Then she died, and the same kind of silence settled over parts of what she left behind. That is why people keep coming back to this story, not because they care about diamonds in the shallow way critics sometimes suggest, but because the handling of those diamonds says something about who gets to write history. The bigger picture is painful in its simplicity. A young woman entered the most powerful family in Britain. She was unprepared, adored, watched, and cornered. She built her own kind of power through emotional openness and public connection. Then she died suddenly. After that, the institution continued, as institutions do. It absorbed the shock, it organized the mourning, it managed the image, and somewhere inside that management, the full public trail of some of her personal objects seems to have gone dim. Maybe every movement was legitimate. Maybe some movements were rushed. Maybe some records were poor from the start. But we do not know. And we should, because Diana's story was never really about jewels, just as it was never really about dresses or tabloid covers or palace balconies. Those things mattered because they revealed deeper truths about class, performance, loneliness, and the cost of living inside a family that is also a state symbol. Her jewelry became part of that language. It marked her shifts from shy bride to global icon, from royal insider to wounded outsider, from future queen to woman determined to define herself on her own terms. So when the record around those objects remains broken, it feels like the story itself remains broken. These stories provide insight into how power behaves after grief, how memory gets sorted by institutions, and how the smallest objects can carry the largest fights. A complete public inventory of Diana's personal jewelry might answer many questions. It might even calm some of the old anger. But it would also do something bigger. It would admit that memory deserves records, not just tribute. And for Diana, that may be the most honest thing of all.